Oh, Ernie doesn't want this.
I'm gonna have something hot.
Do both of them. You get tea and I poured one for him.
They have both. Is there any more books or no? Okay, that's okay.
I only have 1:15. Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Yaakov. Hello, Mario.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, George. Hello, Chaim. Saul is here.
The new book. It's about Christian or.
I saw it being.
I think we ended up on page 76.
We starting today, 36.
Yes,
Yes, the minimum distance for Tfilas Hadera. Correct.
Yep,
Let's just wait. I didn't send out, I just remembered I didn't send out my normal email. And I'm just wondering if people are worried about that.
I send the message, Amy.
Sammy's can't be going to lie.
On the WhatsApp.
Watching it today.
Okay.
That's what I was reading.
Harold is in
Yes.
New Jersey. I know that. Susie, can you pass?
No. Ernie. This is Larry Friedman.
No.
Who?
Larry Friedman.
Larry Friedman's not alive.
I know that. This is from the riots. When Sammy's camera was,
Yeah, that could be Larry
it
Friedman.
is Larry Friedman. She says no. I say it is. One of my grandsons ran across this and sent it to me and I'm looking at it. That's Larry Friedman. We were young
Oh,
then.
thank you, Susie.
Take another look. Tim.
He lived near there.
Yeah.
We all did. We were on Martel. No, I'm sorry, we were on Alta Vista.
We're on promotion.
What? Okay. 76. We derived a chiyuv of, or the source for Tfilas Haderech, from the Gemara Masechta Brachos. So we're going to deal with the measurement of a parsa. What is the minimum distance that you have to travel to be obligated in Tfilas Haderech? And at what point during the journey should you recite it? The Gemara Masechta Brachos, which is the same source that we had last week, appears to address these issues, though as we will see, the precise interpretation of the Gemara is subject to a dispute. Amos Matzli. When does one recite the Tfilas Haderech? Amar Rav Yaakov Amar Rav Chizda, Misha Shemahalech Baderech. When he sets out on his journey. Ad Kama. How long? And it sounds like the Gemara is asking, how long of a trip is going to be the mechayev for the tefillah? Amar Rav Yaakov Amar Rav Chizda ad parsa. According to Rashi, the Gemara is addressing the question of until what point in the journey one may recite Tfilas Haderech. And the answer is that one may only recite it until one has traveled a parsa. So it's a different understanding of what we started off, meaning the Gemara is telling us that when should you recite the tefillah? After you've been into the journey for at least a parsa. Right? Because Rashi says, Ad kama zman li yispalel. When you're taking a journey, is it time to do the tefillah? Ad parsa v'lola achar shahalach parsa. That means you have up until a parsa to start doing the tefillah saderech. If you've gone beyond a parsa, l'chora, you would not be able to say the tefillah. The Birkas Moshe, cited in the Pirkei Teshuvos, explains that according to Rashi, the purpose of tefillah saderech is related to the theme of the Gemara in Source 1, consulting with one's creator prior to departing to receive approval, so to speak, for the trip. For this reason, it may only be recited at the beginning of the journey. Let's see what this is. Click. Yeah. One second. I can't hear.
I'm not listening, I'm looking for picture.
This is Dr. Agatstein. One second, everybody. Let me take this call. So the Pirkei Teshuvos brings the Birkas Moshe, Liyashrei b'zeh shitas Rashi, Dikishanasa lamala mi parsa shuvein levarach osa. It seems from Rashi that if you had traveled on your journey more than a parsa, then you wouldn't be able to say the tefillah anymore. The Svirale, because Rashi is holding the Iker Takonis Tefillah Saderech Mishum Limolach Bekono. The whole point of this tefillah is sort of get approval from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that you're taking this trip. V'zeh matim davke b'tchilas darko. That only makes sense at the beginning of your trip. V'od miyashav b'zeh. This answer sort of straightens out a contradiction between the Taz and the Magen Avram. Im rishai libracha kishemiskonen latzeis laderech lifnei sheyotzu ma'ir. There's an argument between the Magen Avram and the Taz. Let's say you're traveling from one city to another. Can you say the tefillah before you have left the city? So it depends on these reasons. The Magen Avram and Taz disagree as to whether one may recite tefillah saderech before traveling a parsa outside the city. The Pirkei Teshuvos is suggesting that if the purpose of tefillah saderech is to consult with one's creator, then it is logical to allow its recitation even prior to departing the city. It means departing the city based on the svara that you're asking Hashem's permission or getting his advice, so then you don't necessarily have to have left the city in order to start this tefillah. You could do it even though you're in the same city. In contrast to Rashi, the Bahag, now the Bahag is the Baal Halachas Gedolos, who lived in the times of the Gaonim. You're talking about 800, 900. Rashi lived about 1,000. So the Bahag understands the Gemara's question as addressing the minimum distance of travel that obligates one to recite Tefillah Saderech. The Gemara's answer is that you have to travel at least a parsa. So he's not learning like Rashi. Afilu nafik l'sugi chad parsa tzarich litzli Tefillah Saderech. Means what's the minimum shear for which you would say Tefillah Saderech if you travel at least a parsa? The Rosh rules in accordance with the Bahag, due to the fact that he cannot understand why Rashi would say that one may not recite Tfilas Haderech after traveling more than a parsa. The Rosh adds that according to Bahag, a parsa must remain of one's travels in order to recite Tfilas Haderech if you didn't recite it at the start. Hence, if less than a parsa remains until one's destination, one doesn't recite Tfilas Haderech. That's how the Tur understands it, which is brought by the Shulchan Aruch. Others, such as the Divrei Shmuel, argue that as long as one is entering an unknown city, even if one has less than a parsa remaining, you can still recite Tfilas Haderech. So the Rosh, now remember, the Shulchan Aruch would use a trifecta of poskim, usually. The Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. And usually, if it was 2 out of 3, holding in one shita, the Shulchan Aruch would usually poskim like 2 out of the 3. That's why, and the Rosh, his Piskei Halachas is in the back of every Masechta. You won't find it as a code. Either the Rif also is not a code listed as halacha, halacha, halacha. You have to. It's in sort of the text of either the Rif, which is also in the back of the Gemaras, and the Rosh. This is the Rosh being cited on his comments on Brachas Daf Dalet. Nirish Perish Halachas Gedolos Iker. Im yesh lo adayin lelechas harbe lama lo yivarach. And if he still has, he didn't understand Rashi. Why can't you say that Tfilas Haderech if you've once you've traveled the parsa? Why shouldn't you? Abel kashyesho leilach pachos mi parsa bekarv leir lo avi makom sakon of ein tzarich levav. Rosh says if there is not a parsa left, then you would not say Tfilas Haderech. The Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the Bahag, while the Ramah is strict at least lechatchila to comply with the opinion of Rashi and recite Tfilas Haderech within the first parts of the trip. Shulchan Aruch, Kuf Yud. Ein la'oimra, you're not to say Tfilas Haderech, elim ken yeshel leilech parsa. He has to have at least a parsa remaining on his travels. If he has aval pachos mi parsa, lo yachtam bebaruch. You shouldn't conclude it with a bracha if there's less than a parsa. And then the Shulchan Aruch, in the name of the Ramah, says ulachatchila yomer oisa b'parsa rishona. You should try to recite the Tfilas Haderech in the first parsa of your travels. V'imshachach mila oimra. If you forgot to say it at the beginning, yomer oisa kozman shu b'derech. You can say it at any time in your trip. As long as it's not less than a parsa close to the new city that you're going to sleep in. At that point, you should not say that Tfilas Haderech with a bracha.
So that raises the question of what happens if he's only going a parsa and a foot. He has 1 foot to say it, because remember, he must say it on the condition that he hasn't reached within a parsa of the city. But if he's only going a parsa and a foot, he has to say it because he's going more than a parsa. It only works if you have like 2 parsas. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense.
Or you'd have to say it before you start traveling.
Well, unless you hold like Rashi, I guess. But
Huh?
yeah, I mean, you'd have to say it right away.
You have to say it right away.
The first second.
The Mishnah Berurah explains that the reason for the measurement of a parsa is that the roads were generally assumed to be safe if they were within a parsa of an inhabited area. He also writes that one recites Tfilas Haderech when traveling by boat or by train. Ein la'omer shapochos miparsa b'korv le'ir, ein ha'makam sakona. If you're less than a parsa within a city, I mean, you're traveling to a city, and you've gotten to a point where you're less than a parsa away from the city. It's not considered a makam sakona minastam. Im lo shemuchzik lan ba'osu makam shemakam sakona, unless it's known as a very bad area, which is a dangerous area. So then, az yesh levarach tefillas haderech b'chol gadim, then of course you should recite it. For example, let's say it's a bad part of town, right? It might be considered a makam sakona. Ein chiluk ben holech b'sfina laholech b'yabasha. He says, the Mishnah Berurah says there's no difference whether you travel by boat or you're on dry land. He's quoting the Eliyahu Rabbah. That's the Aleph Reish. The Eliyahu Rabbah was a famed Achron who lived in either the 17 or 1800s. That the Mishnah Berurah, remember, the Mishnah Berurah is trying to catch up, the Magen Avram and the Shach and the Taz were the super commentaries. The Shulchan Aruch had written the Shulchan Aruch in like early 1500s. And the Ramah was in Krakow in like 1580. And then the Shach and the Taz, the main commentators, were within the next 100 years. So you're talking about from 1750 to when the Chafetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah in, let's say, 1930s, came out early 1900s. You're talking about a period of 250 years of a lot of achronim, like the Eliyahu Rabbah, who had, so he gathered all that material to update the Shulchan Aruch. That's basically what the Mishnah Berurah did. Mesilas HaBarzel, he says the iron road that refers to railroads. Yesh levarech tefillas haderech afilu noiseh rak parsa. As long as your trip is a parsa, you need to do the tefillas haderech. And he gives you a summary of the various machlokim we just went through.
So there's no difference, according to the Mishnah Berurah, whether you travel by boat, train, or walk. I think that's what he's saying, right?
That's what he's saying. Or horse and buggy, meaning dry land. And we're going to see the whole concept of air travel was, I think it was compared to a boat, compared to like being in the waves of a sea. I think Rav Moshe is going to talk about that. We'll see. Somebody's going to talk about that. Yeah. I also think that for the 2,000 years or so, that the main worry were highway robbers and people who would kill you on the road. That's why this whole thing about near the city, not near the city, usually outside the city was uninhabited. And it was dangerous because there were listim. There were highway robbers who would either, there were listim mezuyin, there were armed robbers, and the Gemara talked about that as well. So the sakonas that we think about, of course, on a boat and on a train, the sakonas became more physical. Accidents, drowning, not just being held up. So at what point does one recite tefillas haderech? We mentioned above that according to the Gemara, one recites tefillas haderech, that's for beginning the journey. The Shulchan Aruch rules accordingly in the first part of the previous source. Oimer oisa achar shehichzik baderech. So that's, you got to start the journey. Vein lo oimer elam ken yesh lo leilek parsa. And there has to be at least a parsa left on the trip. Based on this ruling, the Magen Avram writes that one should not recite it after leaving the outskirts of the departure city. Nearly the lo yomer besoch ibur shapir. Huh?
One should recite.
One
should recite.
That one should recite it after leaving the outskirts of the departure city, meaning
And that was
Magen
my,
Avraham is saying you shouldn't recite it while you're still in the city.
that was my question last week. is
Correct.
You have massive sized cities that are like, 100 miles in length. And if you, when you go from, if you're going from, Calabasas to Palm Springs, you can drive 100 miles before you actually are leaving anything, any place where there's residents.
Well, a bigger question based on this Ramah, this is based on the Ramah. We're gonna modify the Ramah, but based on this Ramah, we always are starting the Tfilas Haderech in Inglewood, LAX. We haven't left the city. The plane backs away from the whatever you call that, the Skyway, and we start saying Tfilas Haderech. Well, you're still in Los Angeles. You haven't left the city. So what is going on here with this Magen Avraham?
Well, not to get into municipal government, but aren't they all different cities in LA County? I mean, Beverly Hills is a separate city. They're in LA County, but they're separate cities.
Boom Shabbos,
I understand, but that's the question. What does it mean by a city? That's what it comes down to. If you leave Calabasas, that's a separate city. So, well, that's the question in a city like LA. And, New York, it's all New York City, different boroughs. But here, it's LA County, and there are many different cities in LA County.
We're going to deal with the city. We're going to deal with this issue tonight. Let's be patient. So nearly the lo yomer b'toch libur shel ir. The Magen Avraham says you should not recite it while you're still in the city that you're departing from. The hainu b'toch ayin amo. That means within 70 amos. It means even when let's say you're 50 amos outside the city, you're still considered within the city. Unless you're 70 amos and a bit outside of the city. The ibur de masa kamasa kedamin b'nadorm. The immediate outskirts of a city are still considered part of the city, like we learn in the dorm. And the Emek HaBracha writes that this refers to the tchum of the outskirts of the city. The tchum is a boundary of 2,000 amos, surrounding the city in all directions, past which one may not walk on Shabbat. According to the Emek Bracha, the point at which one recites Tfilah Derech is 2,000 amos past the outskirts of the city, which extend for 70 amos past the main part of the city. According to Magen Avraham, one recites Tfilas Haderech after passing the 70 amos of the outskirts. These things are much more understandable when you visit Israel. Netanya, even those cities, Netanya, Kfar Saba, they blend into the other cities. But let's say Yishuvim, like Modi'in, has a clear, it's the end of the city, and then there's outskirts. And there's other cities like that are more defined, Maccabim, Re'ud, even you could say Efrat. There's a clear area where the city ends, then you travel out of the city, and you're out of there. A larger metropolitan area, like what Chaim is asking about, Los Angeles is what we're going to have to deal with. Now, the Taz holds that one may recite Tfilas Haderech immediately after preparing to leave, even if one has not yet departed. Perush. Number one, don't delay reciting it until after the first parsa. So the Taz, not like the Magen Avraham, says that you can already say the Tfilas Haderech when you're in the same city. Means the beginning of your journey means once you've decided that you're going to go, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've started moving. Some are makpid, not to recite it, until you're already in the fields outside of the city. However, he says, Ein lezeh shorsh ve'ikr mikol hapirushim. He says, I don't know where they got this. There's no source. Varei Maharam means, I believe he's referring to the Marami Rottenberg, who lived in Worms, who's like the sort of the godfather of the Ashkenazi poskim. That the Marami Rottenberg in Germany, he's the major Ashkenazi posek. So that's why the Taz is referencing the Maram. He would do it in the morning, on the day when he was going to travel. But it's not, it's mashma that the Maram didn't necessarily do it while he was on the road. Because makom niratam, the mashma mispam also chutz le'ir. What's the reason for those people who only wanted to say it once they're out of the departure city? I guess he would meet up with other people traveling and sort of like B'Rov Am Hadras Melech, that reciting it with a lot of people, you're getting the zchus of the community as well. The Mishnah Berurah rules that l'chatchila one should follow Magen Avram, which was, let's to remind everybody, that you only say it once you leave the departure city. But b'diavad you can rely on the Taz. Ataz matir afilu b'toch ha'ir, misha shegomer belibo ve'echin atzmo lotzes. The Taz seems to be saying that if you're traveling to Israel at 11 o'clock in the morning, that morning when you leave your house, you can already say Tfilas Haderech. Aval Elio Rabba, the Prima Godim, Ushari Achroinim, Rokin al Zeh. They argued with the Taz. That you should delay it until when you left the city. You could rely on the Taz. When you're leaving your house. But let's say you're in the middle of your journey, you're staying in a hotel. That you can already say in the morning when you're preparing yourself to leave. He's already considered on the road. And therefore, that Tfilas Haderech you can say when you're still in the same city. Now, distance or time of travel. We have already seen that according to Shulchan Aruch, one must recite Tfilas Haderech when traveling a distance of more than a parsa, which normally takes 72 minutes when walking by foot. One parsa is equivalent to 4 meal, and it is generally assumed that one walks a meal in 18 minutes, and therefore 4 meal in 72 minutes. The Achronim debate whether one measures this based upon distance traveled or the travel time when using faster methods of transportation. The Shevet HaLevi, the Rav Vosner, who just passed away a few years ago, rules that one measures the distance of a parsa regardless of the method of transportation.
Ernie, question.
Yes, George.
As we're going through all of this, in the time that they were looking at it, usually they would embark on a trip and it would be sometimes a many-day trip. In our time, where we do things differently, for example, one day I may be flying to go to X. So I say Tfilat Haderech. When I get to my destination, I then embark on a different modality of transportation, like a car or a bus or a boat. Does that entail that the Tfilat Haderech that you say in your original going from home is sufficient? Or do you then supplement and do Tfilat Derech for each successive event that you're doing?
You might have to do a tefillah saderech for, if you're we're gonna see what determines it, whether it's length of travel or going to different cities. But yes, George, if you now are in Italy and you're not gonna do another excursion by boat, which is of sufficient distance, or by train, then you would make a new tefillah saderech. Yes.
Okay.
Now, if you,
I mean, that's what I've been
you arrive,
doing.
if you arrive in Israel after a long trip, which you said tefillah saderech, and then you remain in Yerushalayim and you don't take any more excursions,
Then that makes sense.
then
You don't have
wouldn't
to.
say tefillah saderech.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
This is going to be spelled out. We will, it will be spelled out. But very good question. Kibenos is a pashut. He says, we don't calculate based upon time of travel. Rak kirva sa'ir parsa kipshuta is the city that you're traveling to further than a parsa. Dalo bizman hazeh, he says today in modern times, shaholchim gam im avironim, when you travel with planes, the efshir lalechas lemedina sayam rachok toch sha'a uktsas yoter. You can travel to another country in less than an hour. Is that a reason, even though you travel to a different country, not just a different city? Halu pashut ki ayidei orcha makom ad shemegila matara nitarech gam zman hasakana v'tzarech tefillah. The longer the distance is, the greater is the time of danger and necessity for tefillah. And Susie, what's going on? Yeah, but I'm teaching now. Most Ashkenazi poskim rule similarly, that a parsa is defined as a unit of distance. However, many Sephardic poskim, such as the Yalkut Yosef, rule that one measures a parsa according to time rather than distance. He says, you only finish with the name of Hashem with a bracha if you're traveling from city to city. And yesh ben nesiato kashir parsa, there has to be the distance of 4 mil, shu shava chomesh, or let's say an hour and a fifth, shivim u'shnayim dakos, kain b'rakevet ubein ba'autobus v'rechav prati, whether it's by train or bus or private car.
By the way, that answers the question of Chaim. You go from city to city.
That's according to the Sephardim.
Yeah, but
Let's
seems
see,
to
according to Sephardic practice, one who travels by car outside the city for less than 72 minutes would not recite Tefillah Saderech. While according to the Ashkenazic practice, one would recite it when traveling more than a parsa outside the city. So going from Yerushalayim to Tel Aviv, so you're certainly traveling more than a parsa, it's more than 4 mil. So you would, now if it takes less than 72 minutes, according to the Sephardim, they would not say it. According to us, we would say it. City or towns within a parsa.
Yeah, but according to the Sephardim, it's talking about walking that 72 minutes.
No, you said she bein b'rakevet, bein ba'autobus u'v'rechav prati. You understand? He says at the time of travel is what determines it. 72 minutes of travel, no matter how you're traveling, whether by.
In other words, walking, everything, it's the same. Okay.
That's their psak.
I hear it.
Now, in earlier times, one who traveled more than a parsa outside the city outskirts would generally be traveling in an open, more dangerous area and could be exposed to bandits, like we talked about, other dangers. Today, one can travel from one's departure city for long distances, with less than a parsa in between the departure city and other towns or suburban areas located off the highway. This is exactly Chaim's question.
Mm-hmm.
Does such travel still warrant Tfilas Haderech? Those of you who grew up in Los Angeles, I'm looking at the Zoom here. Chaim did. When you used to drive from Los Angeles to San Diego, and you crossed the San Onofre nuclear plant, and you were now in Camp Pendleton. So you went for 20 miles with nothing there. First of all, there were very few cars. It's mamish, like the whatever you call Los Angeles County, Orange County, civilization ended there. Now today it still ends, but it's much less because civilization has extended in both directions. San Diego towards us and LA towards Camp Pendleton. So that amount of distance where you're mamish in the open without civilization. So that's what we're dealing with here. Like you could travel from Ventura to San Onofre, and you're never going to be in an open area. It's all been developed virtually. And when you were a kid and you went to Disneyland, for example, by bus, we went to camp and they took you to Disneyland. Once you left downtown LA, until you got to Downey, there were open tree groves. Today it's one civilization of city all the way. So that's what's being discussed. You see it more in Israel, like between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, or between Yerushalayim and Modi. You leave the city and you're in an open area. We have that less here. And therefore, if it's all town and all suburban, does such travel warrant Tfilas Haderech? The Bir Halacha, who of course is the Chafetz Chaim, addresses this situation and writes that one would not recite Tfilas Haderech if there is a town or settlement within a parsa over the course of the entire journey, since it's considered relatively safe. I'm the Mishnah Baratam, V'umei Rosh. Let's say the total travel is a parsa. But the travel is within a city. Or the next city is within a parsa of your city. So you shouldn't. You could say it, but you should do it without shemu malchus. There's no makom sakana. That maybe the complete tour of saying Tfilas Haderech was only when there's less than a parsa of travel. We don't add up the various travels to make him chayiv, to make the bracha. It requires further analysis, but thus, page 82, the Bir Halacha does not really resolve the question, which accurately describes the situation for many cases of travel today. For instance, in many areas in and outside of Israel, even if after one leaves one's departure city and there are no residential neighborhoods nearby, one will still see another town or suburban area off the highway within a parsa, which according to Chazon Ish equals 2.8 miles. So you need 2.8 miles of like nothing. And even in Israel, he says, you see various settlements. Alternatively, in many places outside of Israel, one can travel for miles on a highway and be surrounded by suburban areas the entire way. For example, one who travels on New York or South Florida highways may drive for an hour. So you're clearly beyond the 72 minutes, whatever, and you see suburban areas on the side of the highway, which essentially means that one never left the outskirts of the city. What is the practical halacha in these situations? We must raise an additional question. The entire premise of the measure of a parsa and the uncertainty of the bir halacha hinges upon the premise that within a parsa of a city, travel is not dangerous, while outside of a parsa, it is dangerous. Today, even one who travels on highways outside suburban areas will generally still be protected by traffic police and other authorities. Instead, the greatest danger is that of a serious traffic accident. Is that grounds alone to recite Tfilas Hadera? Contemporary poskim take essentially two different approaches to these questions. One approach is Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, cited in Halicha Shlomo, who rules not to recite Tfilas Haderech between Jerusalem and Bnei Brak. In the explanatory sections, two explanations are offered for this. The first is that Tfilas Haderech is not recited with the concluding bracha in the scenario of the Bir Halacha, namely, where one travels past many cities or towns on the highway, each of which is within a parse of the previous one. The second explanation is that it is uncertain whether one should recite Tfilas Haderech when taking a trip in a car at all, since most of the concerns in the time of Chazal are no longer relevant, like of bandits and things like that. Rav Shlomo Zalman agrees that when passing Arab villages, one would recite Tfilas Haderech, since that may qualify as a more dangerous area. So, in Halicha Shlomo, Ben Nesiya ben Yerushalayim Bnei Brak, Lo Amar Rabbeinu Tfilas Haderech. Rav Shlomo Zalman did not say Tfilas Haderech. V'chein hara l'shoalim, and he paskin in the same way to people who asked him. What about Dvar Halacha? L'chiyut Tfilas Haderech harit tzarich lios makom shel shtei parsos b'li yishuv. It has to be a distance of two parcels without settlement. Rav Shlomo Zalman mentions a minimum measurement of 2 parsa here, because in his opinion, one only recites Tfilas Haderech if there's a minimum of 2 parsa between towns on the way. The reason is that otherwise, even if one has traveled a parsa, he is still within less than a parsa of another city or town, and such a trip would not warrant reciting Tfilas Haderech. It seems from any other poskim that a distance of more than 1 parsa from one town to the next suffices to recite Tfilas Haderech if the total trip lasts longer. Kasav Rabbeinu b'tshuva. Rav Shlomo Zalman wrote in the tshuva, the mesupaku, he was in doubt, ba'osam akvishim, those roads, uva'osam azmanim sheklei rechav mitzuyim, when there's traffic with cars. V'kol shekain, im yesh gam pikuach shel mishtara niyadid. Are there police cruisers? Are there motorcycle cops? Dietachen shetov levarch b'lias kar sachatima. He says, even if you were going to recite Tfilas Haderech, you should certainly do it without the shame of Hashem. De bizmanenu, in our times, hakvishim rechavim, they're wide roads, umetukanim, they're fixed. V'gam hanesiya behem eina davar hayotze migeder haragel klal. It's nothing unusual about driving on our roads. Then he says, the imibnei tu'unot drachim, if you're worried about accidents, even within the city, you have that danger. We just can't come up with a new prayer. If you're traveling on a highway, where on the whole highway there are other cars, it's like one caravan. It's not like the caravan left the city, they're in the desert now on their own. It's like one big caravan. So according to Rav Shlomo Zalman, the route between Jerusalem and Bnei Brak on Israel's Highway 1 and Highway 4 qualifies for the first criteria of continuous inhabited areas over the course of the entire area. The same would presumably apply when traveling from Jerusalem to Beit Shemesh or Tel Aviv. When looking at a map, it seems that if one uses Rav Shlomo Zalman's approach, requiring 2 parsa in between settlements, which is 9 kilometers, it is possible that Highway 1 and Highway 4 may indeed not have any stretch of more than that distance without an exit or settled area on the side. If one follows the approach that only 1 parsa in between settled areas is needed to warrant reciting Tfilas HaDerech, one could argue that even if one accepts Rav Shlomo Zalman's first premise, there are significant stretches of the highway where the distance in between settled areas is greater than 1 parsa. Back to the middle of the page. Rav Shlomo Zalman would certainly say the same with regard to many highways in the United States or Europe, with suburban areas on the side. Concerning the second, more general consideration, similar sentiments were expressed earlier by the Tzos HaShulchan. Efshar shlo niskanet Tfilas HaDerech ela begavni d'shayach kol hasakonos, that the Tfilas HaDerech were not established by Chazal, rather only for dangers like from wild animals, the listim, bandits, like it mentions in the Tefillah. And therefore, there's a raya from the Tzos HaShulchan that also traveling the way we travel on our roads, we wouldn't say it. A similar position was taken by Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, as reported by Rav Hershel Schachter, that one does not recite Tfilas HaDerech on an ordinary drive, for which one does not get nervous, even if one travels more than 1 parsa outside the city. Rav Schachter recounts this ruling Rav Soloveitchik. He gives an example of traveling over the George Washington Bridge from New York to New Jersey, which spans a distance of longer than 1 parsa over the Hudson River, but is a regular drive taken by thousands of people on a daily basis. And based on the Rav, you wouldn't say that Tfilas HaDerech for it. One second.
I know we'll get there, but this certainly does make you wonder about an airplane, which is, probably much safer than a car, as we all know.
Okay. In the Nefesh HaRav, Amar Rabbeinu, shebeshanim harishonot kishenosaloch bashuv mi Boston to New York. Rav Soloveitchik used to drive from Boston to New York. Tamid nahag lomar Tfilas HaDerech. He would say Tfilas HaDerech. Ach kavor harbe shanim, hitragel kol kach lanesiya ba'aviron. He became so comfortable in traveling by plane. Ad shelo haya lo chashashut u'pachadim klal. He didn't have any nervousness. Uvichei gavna She'ein lanosea pachad klal manasiyah. If a person is not nervous, hayatovus rabbeinu lo shach kol ha'inyan tefillah saderech. The second approach is taken by poskim such as the Yalkut Yosef, who disagree with both of this above. In their opinion, one should recite tefillah saderech today, even when there's less than a parsa in between settled areas. Even though from traveling from Jerusalem to Bnei Brak there are settlements, we say it full tefillah saderech. In noseh bekvish, bini uriini, meaning between cities, kemeshech shava chomesh. If it's an hour and a fifth, 72 minutes. According to the Yalkut Yosef and other Sephardic poskim, one recites tefillah saderech even when there are other settled areas on the way, because the parsa is determined by the time rather than the distance, as discussed above. Many Ashkenazi poskim, including the Chazon Ish and the Shevet HaLevi, also agree that one should recite tefillah saderech even when the cities and towns on the way are less than a parsa apart due to the danger for car accidents. Rav Nissen Karelitz, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Rav Elazar Menachem Shach also held that way. Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon has also argued in favor of this approach. Hinei Talmid Chacham echad yitzia dato de bizman hazeh ein levarach tefillah saderech bebrachim azkar Hashem. One Talmid Chacham suggested that in our time we don't have to say tefillah saderech. Heyot shebaharbei drachim yesh lam yishuvim samuch ledrachim b'toch parto l'derech. This is referring to Rosh Shlomo Zalman. V'levavi lo chen yidmeh. Rav Vosner says, my heart doesn't go along with that. The toch parsa lo muskara k'sheyotze me'iro doesn't say, it says when he leaves his city. It doesn't say what's in the parsa. V'hu adayin toch parsa li'iro, shadayin lo chal alav chiyuv bracha zu. The toch samach la'ir lo shchichi chayos lepistim. Close to the city, there's not going to be bandits and wild animals. Aval, kishu olech, alim haderech v'samach lekvish. But when you're out of the city, and yesh lam yishuvim toch dal milim shir parsa, v'hu over b'ma'uf al yadam, and he passes them quickly. V'hu ba'osam sakanot drachim v'shayachim v'zman hazeh, you have other dangers. You have car accidents. He says, therefore, the distance of the trip is what creates the chiyuv of tefillah saderech. That in fact, the Bir Halacha, the Mishnah Berurah was in doubt over this issue, the Chaim Eisenberg question, and he left it b'tzorchiyun. Uvaniyuti, in my humble opinion, stimata poskim kimufurash t'chai b'tefillah saderech gam time mistaberu. Since he thinks that's a reason to say that you should say tefillah saderech. Okay, I'm going to stop here because the next few ones are going to give us a summary, so it's good to start the summary next week. And we will continue in the halachos of tefillah saderech next week. I think we should finish it. Any questions, comment, or ha'arot?
So this answer open then?
No, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says not to do it. Yalkut Yosef says to do it, and Rav Vosner and Rav the Chazon Ish and other poskim, Ashkenazi poskim, said to do it.
So to what degree? Because the one common theme that you see through all the shuvas is a theme of nervousness. In other words,
The only person who said that was Rav Yoshe Ber, actually. I think that's a huge chiddush. And then it depends on the person. Some people are not nervous when you fly. Other people are very nervous when they fly.
Yeah, but It talks about danger. That the nervousness is synonymous with danger.
but it's a feeling. In other words,
Yeah.
in other words, it may come down to that the halacha will be different every person depending on their feeling. If let's say someone is nervous driving a long distance, right? They may feel better. Someone is I love driving 3-4 hours at a time. It doesn't bother me, right? So it may be like a very in many ways almost like a personal choice, depending on your feeling.
The person who, the person we saw this tonight was Rav Hershel Schachter, who quoted the Rav. He's the one who talked about that.
Right. And by the way, when we learned the halachos of saying Hagomel,
That's coming up. We're gonna be doing that.
feel that today when you travel by air, you don't say Birchas Hagomel. It's not like traveling over the Sahara Desert, over an ocean in a sailboat. The whole different kind of travel. You can't say that you were you felt like in danger.
Well, we're gonna see that most of the poskim learn that when you travel over an ocean, you do say Birchas Hagomel. Because it's considered like you traveled by boat over that ocean.
הדרך, מה?
What was that?
And Rav Soloveitchik's shita of not being nervous would come into play there.
Yeah, if someone's not, I think people are not nervous at all when they fly anymore? Maybe not.
No, and some people are not nervous when they go on a boat today, It's not like the boats of old.
There are people though that if they haven't flown in 10 years, again, they're playing for the first time, they may be nervous. So again, it comes down to maybe it's a question of a personal, feeling.
And it's also a person of Hergel, of getting used to it. Rav Soloveitchik started to get used to flying the plane.
Right?
But the Chiddush, Rabbi Soloveitchik's Chiddush was that it's not an objective standard, it's a subjective standard. That's unique. We have not seen anyone else
Correct.
who said that it's a subjective standard.
And usually that's very difficult in halacha. That's called
Halacha doesn't go like
noisen halacha l'shiurin. When the Chazal in the Shas, when they come onto those kind of subjects, they usually reject it because then it says it'll be a different halacha for each and every person.
Right.
They usually like to standardize it more and give objective criteria for that reason, as opposed to doing it subjective. But it's clear Rav Soloveitchik talked about the subjective feeling. He did.
Yeah, but you have a subjective feeling when on Shabbos you don't feel well, and you think that something's going to happen to you. So then, whether you're allowed to take medicine, whether you're allowed to do
That's
things,
true. No, that's true.
subjective.
The person feels that his life is bisakona.
He's in danger. So then
Might
he's
feel
allowed to do it.
it. That's definitely personal.
Yeah, so you see that there is a subjective
Yes,
side
yes.
to the halacha.
Yes, I agree.
But that's because it's a suffix. We don't really know. And therefore we say every person knows best.
Yeah, but you don't know. You don't know when you get on a plane either. There's a suffix. Always there's a suffix in a plane. You don't
It's
know.
very different because health is a very personal, if whether you are
So it
sick
goes back.
or it's a very personal kind of
But
feeling.
it
But
goes back to
the
the-
danger is the danger. Your
But you gotta
subjective
go
feeling
back-
doesn't change the danger.
It goes back to Shiloh. I remember that Rabbi Krauss asked the Shah. So when you go to make an operation, right? If you have to have an operation, you go ask 2 opinions of a doctor. You make sure that you get the right doctor. You make an opinion. When you go on a plane, you never check on the pilot. The kasha is, how come you don't check on the pilot? You don't know. So you could be nervous about the pilot. You know the answer for that?
Yes, I think if you get on a plane and there's a woman pilot, you have to say Tefillah Sadera.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. but besides the bedicha, what's the reason why when you get on a plane you don't check who the pilot is? Because you're saying you could be in Sakona when you get on a plane, right? The same thing, a person.
Yeah, but when you go on a bridge, you don't check on the architect of the bridge.
Hold on a second.
You don't say what school did he go
but
to.
why not?
Reason you can drink.
An architect on a bridge you better check on, but why not?
The same reason.
Because you assume that the municipal authorities have created standards and that the bridge is
Yeah,
safe
but
because the
when you get on a
architect,
plane, why do you assume that the pilot that's going to take you is really a good pilot?
because the FAA has testing requirements and certification requirements.
You
And
know
that's
what?
what we
It
all
was-
rely on.
you know
It's
what-
just, by the way,
7-year-old
Walter,
issue.
it's the same thing with a surgeon. I've been practicing for 40 years. When I recommend surgery, I would say maybe 2% go seek a second opinion. Rabbi Krause gave such an opinion. But most patients agree to a surgical
I
procedure
can tell you most
because a surgeon has been granted privileges at a hospital because of board certification. They don't just let anybody